The Beaufort County Sheriff's Office says 43 rhesus macaque escaped from the Alpha Genesis facility in the Yemassee Wednesday afternoon.
When 43 monkeys escaped from a South Carolina research facility in the fall of 2024, it reignited the controversy over exploiting these intelligent and sensitive beings for outdated, ineffective, and cruel experimentation. You are a senior research scientist for Peta, and the other very significant thing is you're formerly a lab research scientist. So you really have a unique perspective. Please give us your take on this based on your background.
Actually, there were 50 monkeys originally that were brought over from Morgan Island. And Morgan Island, I don't know, is about 30 miles away from Alpha Genesis. It's an island where for the last about 40 years, 45 years, generations of rhesus macaques have lived on that island. That island was stocked. It was kind of like a giant shopping center, a grocery store for the industry. And so they put animals on there. And there are 4 generations of rhesus macaques who've lived on that island. And when they're there, they're doing their normal macaque thing for the most part. You know, they know everybody on the island. They're related. The moms get to keep their babies. You know, they get to grow up together. But whenever Alpha Genesis gets an order for monkeys, oh my God, they go in and they grab a bunch of them, and they take them out. They bring them back to the facility in Yemassee. They drop them into a cage. And this time, when they did that, 43 of those monkeys said, "No, I'm not staying here." And a new technician left the door open, left a couple of doors open. I truly do not believe it was intentionally. You don't do something like that intentionally. But, the thing about macaques is, and particularly macaques who have lived in the wild, they're going to take that, the moment they see an opportunity, boom, they're out there. And that's what happened. 43 of them took off. But here's a really important point that no one's really talked about yet, is that the reason they stayed around, those 43 out of the 50, is because macaques are like the Marines of monkeys. No one gets left behind. And those 7 animals that were still in that cage, the 43 on the outside would have known them. It would have been their aunties, their sisters, their cousins, and they were not going to leave those animals behind. Yeah.
This is such an incredible insight to this, how much like us they really are, and how incredibly atrocious the way we treat them. They are fully cognizant to know, oh, my relatives or my tribe is back there, we won't leave. This is an insight that people don't have. And let's just tell people a little bit about why you are so informed.
Well, I literally grew up in the primate biomedical industry, working in primate facilities throughout the U.S. I also did a lot of work in sanctuaries in Asia and Africa. I began my career with Rute Galdicus, with the orangutans, and with the long-tailed macaque. So for me, it's always been about the macaque. I know them. I speak macaque. I understand who they are and what they need and where they live and how they live. And I also am unfortunately all too familiar with what their lives are like once they're caught up in the laboratories. This is personal. I mean, when someone talks about dispassionately, 50 or 43, 3 or 4 kilo female rhesus macaques escaped. You know what? In my career, working in Southeast Asia, trapping and sampling and releasing macaques, I've held those animals in my hands. I know exactly what a 3 kilo, young female feels like, what she looks like, what she experiences. So for me, it's personal.
Yes. Let me just take you back a little bit further with that and give us, in your work, what would you be doing in a normal day when you are working in the labs? And I think that will give people a unique perspective as well.
I had been funded to develop a team. The National Institutes of Health, the DARPA, the DOD, had funded me to run a team in Southeast Asia that was looking for what's called the next big one. We were trying to figure out how infectious diseases were moving back and forth between monkeys and humans where these monkeys naturally occur. And that meant that with my team, we were trapping and sampling and thousands of monkeys, collecting biological samples from them, collecting measurements about them, really characterizing when they were in contact with humans, how diseases were moving back and forth. Now, in my case, every one of my monkeys woke up and got let out of the trap to go back and join their troop.
Yeah.
When I was in the laboratories, though, my job was really to help. My job was to make sure that the experiments had a better idea of what these animals were actually infected with. That was a big deal because, a monkey model is really only as good as it is well characterized. So the experimenters were expecting clean, healthy, uninfected animals, when in fact I was showing that the animals that we were bringing in for experimentation had all these unintended infections. The industry didn't want to know that because that makes a problem for them. That's a problem for how they sell the monkeys. That's a problem for how they sell their science. That's a problem for how diseases then moved around in the facilities. And it finally came to a point where they're like, Lisa, stop. Stop telling us that we've got tuberculosis in our monkeys. Stop telling us we've got enteroviruses there. Stop telling us that, MRSA is running through these animals. And I didn't stop until I actually left.
Mm-hmm. And the one thing that came to mind is how it went from when you were doing it to the catch and release to now, where from what I understand, the animals are no longer released. They are not released back in. When was that determination and why was that made? I guess is my question.
So let me clarify a little bit about the research that I was doing. So my research was really focused on sampling monkeys and humans who came into contact in villages, in temples, in forests. These were wild, free-ranging primates that were not supposed to be destined ever to find their way into the lab. These were animals that were naturally interacting with humans. And we wanted to see how diseases were moving back and forth between them. Now, in parallel, though, in the countries where I was working, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, monkey farms existed. And monkey farms were set up by the pharmaceutical industry, by the National Primate Research Centers decades ago to catch wild monkeys from wherever they could get them, bring them in, supposedly breed them, and then sell the captive bred animals. That's actually not how it worked. Primates don't breed well in captivity. So these farms never had enough monkeys to supply to the industry here in the US or into the UK or Europe or China or Japan. These monkey farms were always soliciting, going out and saying, hey, bring me more monkeys. Bring any monkey you can get, bring it on in. I'll take it. And we'll pretend that it's a captive bred monkey so that we'll fill out the paperwork that it's a captive bred monkey so that we can then sell it to, whoever's coming knocking on our door asking for the next shipment of a few hundred monkeys.
Yeah. I think the whole aspect of because it's captive bred, it makes it okay is absurd.
Look at that.
Oh.
He's taking a nap, but he's always alert. He was, before that, someone was grooming each other. I mean, this is what macaques are supposed to be. You saw the beautiful colors of their fur. Their face had been darkened because they'd been out in the sun. They had each other. They were grooming. They were interacting. Mom was there with her infant. This is macaque life. She's holding on to his leg, allowing him to explore, but making sure that she's protecting him, that she has her hands on him. I mean, this is what any mother would do. And this is such a clear demonstration. There's no difference. There is no meaningful difference between us and them, and the way that we care for each other, the way that we have a sense of responsibility for everyone in our family. And it's tragic because in the laboratory, that infant would have been ripped out of that mom's hands, forcibly ripped out of her hands. The CEO of Alpha Genesis was like, oh, we're going to give them peanut butter sandwiches when we catch them. And, look, it's all happy. It's fun. It was almost like it was a circus. But that's not the dirty side of this. That's not the reality of this. The to get those monkeys back, some of them were going to be darted. Some of those animals have not been caught. One of the things that is positive about this is that people are seeing these monkeys for the first time. They're seeing them kind of as individuals. Often when we talk about laboratory monkeys, we only see them in the cages, in the metal cages. And I think that cage makes some people turn away.
It does.
When you see a monkey, you see a monkey though out in the trees, you turn towards it because they're such beautiful animals. You see them running across the ground. You see them leaping through the canopy and you're like, wow, that's a really cool, really amazing animal. And so people are seeing that, and then people are hearing, wait, that's part of like 3 or 5 or 7,000 monkeys that are in the laboratory here. We're still using this animal who looks so much like me, who behaves so much like me. We're using them in the labs. People didn't know that. So, when these monkeys escaped, their celebrity status actually allowed people to see them and understand, and that's good for them. That was needed.
Yes, I hope that this results in a lot more awareness. And so I'm going to ask you this question. If people are appalled by what they've heard so far, what do you recommend that they do, Dr. Lisa?
Go to Peta.org, put in alpha genesis, and you will see that we've got calls to action where you can actually reach out to the National Institutes of Health. Because these 43 monkeys were actually destined. The National Institutes of Health was the client. They're the ones who basically said, give us these monkeys. Tell the National Institutes of Health, stop spending our taxpayer dollars. Tell the National Institutes of Health that these animals who have now been in what we've technically referred to as an uncontrolled environment can't go back into experimentation. They've been out wandering around Yamasee, foraging at the Chinese restaurant, coming into contact with the wildlife there, coming into contact with people. That's no longer what is considered a captive bred controlled environment. And in that case, it's very likely that alpha genesis is going to kill those animals. And we can't let that happen. PETA actually had a donor come forward and pledged $250,000 to get these animals into sanctuary. Born Free USA, sanctuary in Texas, has said, hey, we will make room. We will accommodate these animals. Let's have these conversations. Now, it's going to take money, but the first thing that has to happen is that National Institutes of Health and Alpha Genesis acknowledge that they have a responsibility to these animals and that the only happy ending is for them to spend the rest of their lives in sanctuary, and for NIH and Alpha Genesis to foot the bill on that.
Trigger warning, we will now be playing a few seconds of some lab footage that may be disturbing to some. Oh my gosh, that was shocking.
You just saw the monkey importation pipeline, experimentation pipeline from Mauritius, where the companies have monkey farms, but they're still pulling monkeys from the wild. You saw the violence and the horrors that those animals experience. You saw the injuries. You saw the viciousness with which these primates, you and I are primates, macaques are primates. We, again, go back to what I said before, we feel in the most important ways, there's no difference. They feel that pain. They feel that terror. They feel that anguish and distress. It is written all over their bodies. In their right mind, think that subjecting an animal to those types of conditions is in any way representative of the human experience. And yet we are asking these monkeys to be our safety filter, to step in for us. How much longer do we need to see the data that comes out? The data that says from the scientists, 90 to 95% of what is supposedly safe and effective in the animal model fails in the human model before this industry says, okay, I get it.
What's the
I want
pushback?
to,
Why would they be so, yeah, what's the pushback?
this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that has developed this infrastructure. You know, there's the monkey pipeline bringing in monkeys from Mauritius and Southeast Asia. There's the infrastructure of these big facilities here in the US. There's the caging infrastructure. When you have something in place, it's really hard to wrestle that out of an industry's hand. That being said, the industry, including the pharmaceutical industry, because the clients are saying, you know what, man, these monkeys are coming in, they're sick, they're dirty. You know, I'm halfway through my study, and all of a sudden one of them, you know, pops with tuberculosis. I want to do better science. I want to make sure that my drugs and treatments can get into clinical trials faster. So clients are saying, don't give us the monkeys. Let's focus on the non-animal methods, the new alternative methods. And this makes so much sense, because what these NAMs, non-animal methods, new alternative methods, however you want to say it, what these NAMs are, is that it actually relies upon human tissues to test drugs that are going to be applied to humans. So it's not a monkey in a cage. You know, it's a 3D printed tissue. It's organs on the chip. If you want to understand what's going to work in a human, you don't use monkeys. You don't use monkey tissues. You actually have to use human biology, human immunology, human physiology. And this is where the scientific community is absolutely exploding with innovation. You know, a decade ago, the use of NAMs, new alternative methods, I mean, it was a teeny tiny fraction. It was almost, you know, very few scientists were doing that because the money wasn't there. You know, National Institutes of Health, the other big funders weren't putting the money out, but that's changed. You know, and certainly it was COVID that really kind of exploded this new industry, focusing on, if you want to improve human health, then you use human tissues, human samples, human physiology.
The scientists like yourself that know what's going on, is there a pushback from the scientists, and why is this so slow?
The whole point of the National Primate Research Centers, or the big primate importers, what they sell is supposed to be a clean, healthy, well-characterized, purpose-bred primate, so that when the scientist comes in and says, okay, I need, a half a dozen rhesus macaques, that they are getting exactly that, a clean, healthy, adult, male rhesus macaque. The scientists have now come to realize that that's not what they're getting. In 2019, an investigator at the Oregon Health Sciences started a study. And about halfway through his study, he realized that his monkeys had tuberculosis. Novo Nordisk, the world's biggest pharmaceutical company, realized that, one of its U.S. companies doing experiments for them, was using wild-caught monkeys. The industry is publishing papers saying, these monkeys that we're being assigned on our studies, they have infections that we've not seen before. And this is a problem for us. This is a problem for the science. So scientists have woken up, and I think they're pissed. Ironically, the scientists, because they can't get the data now, are the ones who are saying, you know what, forget the monkey stuff. Let's focus on new alternative methods, because clearly the monkey is not reliable.
Well, that seems like the most logical thing for scientists to be wanting to be using the latest innovation.
One of the things we haven't talked about is that, the Alpha Genesis facility is funded by taxpayers. It's, a large part of their funding is this $19 million of grants from the National Institutes of Health. If a facility that's getting that much money can't keep their monkeys healthy and safe and warm and contained and disease-free, imagine all these other kind of smaller facilities, or these facilities where no one gets to look inside. Imagine what's happening there.
Can you speak about the FDA Modernization Act for us a little bit?
Absolutely. In 2022, in December of 2022, so 2 years ago, this FDA Modernization Act was passed. And this was huge. This was the first time in decades that the FDA came out and said, again, recognizing that the animal models were consistently failing, the FDA said, we're going to allow the scientists to focus on these non-animal methods, these new alternative methods, the organs on the chips, the methods that were focusing on human physiology, and allow the pharmaceutical industry and the experimenters to submit to the FDA the results using those types of non-animal methods. This was so long overdue. Now, one of the first things that the industry came back and said was, yeah, that's great, but it's going to take us a long time to get that done. And, so don't get your hopes up. And, we're going to still use animals. We will slowly try to work these non-animal, these new alternative methods in, but, we're going to rely upon the monkeys and the mice and the beagles. And so now 2 years later, the FDA Modernization Act Part 3 is now being introduced. I think even the FDA and certainly the rest of the scientific community is saying, like, all right, come on, we got to get moving here. Every day, every month, every week, every year that we delay and we continue to rely upon the animals, we are delaying treatments. We are delaying safe and effective drugs. So move it, get out of the way, stop putting up the roadblocks, stop continuing to rely upon the animal methods, adapt, evolve, be innovative. And, we are seeing that in some of the pharmaceutical companies. One of the big pharmaceutical companies committed $500 million to these new alternative methods because they know this is always going to be about money.
Absolutely.
And if the scientists in the pharmaceutical industry can spend less money in order to get their drugs and treatments approved, they're going to.
And by that same token, these are the clients. They can just simply demand.
But it's that, so the industry has had this very simple soundbite, for decades. If we don't use animals, if we don't use monkeys, Granny's going to die. And that's been their soundbite. But you know what? That doesn't stand up anymore. The science doesn't stand up. The fact that this industry has contributed to 2 species of primates being listed as endangered, the fact that the importation of these primates is associated with all these infectious diseases that are coming in with the monkeys. I just got the data from the CDC recently. There were so many monkeys coming in infected with tuberculosis, strains of tuberculosis that we've never seen in animals here before. Monkeys coming in with diarrheal diseases. Monkeys are, landing dead on arrival. This industry is more likely to trigger the next pandemic than it is to bring about meaningful change if they continue to rely upon the importation and use of monkeys.
What can the public do? I'm sure people watch the show, they're going to say, this is something I have to take action on. So what can they do?
Go to Peta.org. Follow the links. You can contact the National Institutes of Health. You can contact the CDC and let them know that this is not what you're paying for. This is not what your tax dollars should be going towards, that you are concerned about the risk of infectious diseases coming in with them, that you are mortified that your tax dollars are being used to take these sentient, loving, dedicated creatures and having them put into these tiny little metal boxes alone. We've basically ridden on the backs of these monkeys. We have taken everything from them. There is never a happy ending for these animals. You saw it at the beginning of the show. A macaque belongs in their troop, with their friends, with their family, doing their monkey thing out in the wild where they are critical parts of the ecosystem. Once they're caught up in the experimentation pipeline, the only way that they end up is in a red biohazard bag being dropped into an incinerator.
I would just urge everyone that sees this show to take action, to contact PETA and take the steps. There's letters that you can write. It's set up very easily too, isn't it?
It's set up so easy.
Click, and you've done your work. Tell us a little bit about the Bloomberg documentary, if you would, and why that's so important.
So this just came out very recently, and this is a very short 26-minute documentary. You can watch it on YouTube, and it It's not easy to see. I want to be clear about that from the beginning. But what this really shows is this primate importation pipeline that I was talking about. And it also talks about an undercover investigation that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did in Cambodia that ripped open the curtains. How these monkeys get from the forest into the cage. You learn about the monkey laundering, this falsely taking wild monkeys and pretending that they are somehow captive monkeys and sending them off to the U.S. You learn about how officials in these countries are corrupt. You learn about the monkey smuggling. I think it's really important that people see this because most people don't know how dramatic it is that this is going on at this stage. If people don't see this, then they can't fight back. They can't take the actions that they need to do in order to make sure that this stops, that the primate importation pipeline is shut down, that the door is closed.
Well, I have to thank you so much for coming. It's always informative. We're hoping this happens sooner than later. It looks like has been some great progress, but it sounds like you really, really are asking the public to step up now because we're turning than ever. So please, everyone,
step up now. Tell everyone. Tell everyone. That's the thing. It's once people know, once people see it, you can't unsee it. And that means this industry can no longer operate in secrecy.
That's true. That's very true. We can all have a part in that. Thank you for watching Action Hour on Unchained TV. Thank you, Dr. Lisa, for being on today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Remember to go to peta.org, search Alpha Genesis to take action. You've been watching Action Hour on Unchained TV streaming network. I'm your host, Lindsey Baker. See you next time, and thank you for watching.